Bonjour, bienvenue, welcome. I promise I will stop with the French right now. It's a pleasure to have you with us today at Rice University for this fabulous and I know already very fruitful gathering of minds around Michel Foucault. For those who love him and for those who don't love him. But what we'll be talking about today, I think, is what it means to be human in one place at Rice, but we have people online, we have people coming from different places, so it's a gathering of minds to get to know each other and also Michel Foucault. So first, I would like to introduce our host or hostess, Niki Clements. So Niki Kasumi Clements is the Wyatt J. and Lily G. Jackson Associate Professor of Religion at Rice University. Clements researched Michel Foucault's fascination with Christianity and ethics through his published works and the archives at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. And for 2024 is an invited researcher through the DEA program of the, I need to think about English and French at the same time. So FMSHES to continue a research collaboration in France. A first monograph cites of the aesthetic self-engages the ethics of John Cassian through Foucault's interest in this late ancient ascetic as part of his genealogy of desiring subject. Clément is at work on a second monograph, Foucault the Confessor, on Foucault's engagement with the history of Christianity as a curriculum in his turn towards ancient sexual ethics and the possibilities for critiquing power through arts and living. She's also the co-editor of Foucault's Confession under contract, bravo, with Columbia University Press. So please join me and welcome Niki Clements.
Juste un moment. Merci beaucoup, bienvenue à toutes et à tous. Après ça, je vais arrêter avec mon français parce que je ferai beaucoup d'erreurs. Thank you so much. Welcome to everyone as we massage some of the tech issues. It's an honor to invite you today. It's an honor to bring you to this virtual space. And in fact, the virtuality of this space is a fitting testament because this is not the first Foucault conference that we have convened at Rice, but in fact the second. The second because the first was planned in 2019 to take place gloriously in April 2020. Yes, you know what happens next. So April 2020 comes and goes. Of course, everything expands. Better? And eventually we're able to actually make a virtual version of the colloquium, thanks to the efforts. Okay.
No, we're gonna need to use that. Yeah, it's on your pack.
It's me, it's not you. Okay, so in 2021 then, we were able to host a virtual version of Foucault's Confessions. This was on the occasion of the publication of Foucault's fourth volume in the History of Sexuality, Les de la Chair, edited by Frédéric Gros. And this was an attempt to make sense of what this fourth volume, this volume that was supposed to be the key to Foucault's History of Sexuality, was published in 2018 in French, translated in 2021. And so we were able in April, May, June to convene virtually in 2021 to celebrate this occasion. It was a celebration, but it was also a confusion because of course, Foucault is not giving us a key to his history of sexuality, but instead a very supreme treatment of early Christian figures. As figures like the Chevalier are experts on. This is Foucault's landmark engagement with John Cassian, my love, Augustine, Tertullian, Clement, the Shepherd of Hermas, Methodius, figures of Thecla, but not quite Thecla. And so there was this great confusion about what do we do with this Foucault who's talking about retrograde forms of Christianity? How do we think about this in relation to a press that wants to herald the key to the history of sexuality and claim that Foucault gives us new ways of thinking about consent for an era of Me Too. Is it laughable, right? This is not the Foucault of today. This is a way of thinking instead about the ways that discourse around Foucault have been so important for how we all come to Foucault's work, and what possibilities there are for us to take up his work, to critique it, to challenge his own epistemic horizon that is dated from 40 years ago, and to continue to think today on the basis of many of the disciplines that he himself has contributed to: queer studies, Black studies, anthropology, art history, religion, philosophy, political theory, archaeology, classics, and psychoanalysis. What is it that speaks to us all? Why is it that Foucault is still one of, if not the most cited scholar in the world in any field? This is rather astounding. And it's astounding that we have so many different disciplinary contexts that both take up Foucault and challenge him. And in that movement, challenge us to think about what are these tools? How are they tools for us today? How do they invite us to think critically as well as charitably with what Foucault himself was trying to work out over a too short span of his life? So this is our occasion today to think with Foucault, to push Foucault beyond himself, to think with the Foucauldian ethos, and to know that the work wasn't done in 1984, nor is it done today, but together, building these collectives, we have the best chance of actually thinking critically about what these genealogies, as a history of our present, a collective present, might offer us for thinking about how do we challenge forms of injustice, colonialism, capitalism, cultural erasure. Saidiya Hartman long ago outed Foucault in Scenes of Subjection for his lack of treating chattel slavery in the United States as a way of understanding how Foucault's own conception of power was limited. It's even more clear today that this critique holds, on the one hand, and also that Foucault, over his last 10 years, as he's rewriting his History of Sexuality series, actually does start to reckon with the limitations himself. He starts to think about the limitations of his discourses of power and knowledge, because frankly, it's too bleak. How is it that we can think about ourselves as shaped, societally shaped through these normative discourses, shaped through these structures of power, and also think about how we can have a relation to ourselves that is not fully determined by the ways in which we are subject? How can we, in other words, come to understand our own subjectivation as a process that we ourselves participate in, whether it's blindly in order to become more docile bodies, or whether it's in forging our own practices and challenging norms, in forging new ways of living that then open up these possibilities for others. I think Saint Foucault is a person who is not only thinking about this conceptually, but he's also living this in his person, right? Coming of age in France, the ways in which homosexuality itself was taboo. We have to confront so many different ways of being othered, so many ways of not fitting the norm, of being abnormal, a danger, perverse. And so he thought too about the other strategies of subjection. How is it in the 19th century we shape these different ways of normalizing the subject, saying here's what it looks like to be a good heteronormative, monogamously coupled producer and replicator of certain kinds of subjects. So Foucault is on the hunt. He was on the hunt to figure out history of sexuality might tell us about how we are constantly compelled in our own contemporary moment to confess who we are. And not just any confession. This is the confession of our sexual desire, our sexual identity. And it's a sexual identity that needs to conform. Foucault refused this, right? He broke through, and he not only created conditions for thinking about how subjects are shaped in these norms, but how through our own practices, our own refusals of certain practices, we can also show that other ways of life are possible. This is the ethical Foucault that I think at least we can celebrate today, that we engage, and that is at the heart of my own research. Is sound good now? This is my little X tab.
Yeah.
I mean, I had notes. There was a whole talk.
We're gonna need you to use this, and then we're gonna turn you off.
Okay. Oh. All right. Costume change. I'm no longer bionic. It's a shame. All right, it's an honor to welcome you all. Part 2. All right, today I'm just going to give you a brief welcome, as well as set some contexts for how we can think about the other much more rich and conceptually interesting papers will be over the next 2 days. I also have the honor of being able to thank our sponsors, past and present, because as we were saying earlier, this has been an event between 1 and 5 years in the making, but there have been very constant sources of support. The Office of Research at Rice University, through their Creative Ventures Fund, has been incredibly supportive. The Department of Religion and their Rockwell Fund has been enduringly present. And the Humanities Research Center in the School of Humanities has constantly shown up physically and with their resources. This year, we're also grateful for the contributions of the Department of Modern and Classical Languages and Culture, of which Jaqueline Couti is the head. The Center for Sexuality, Women and Gender, where we have Laura Windelthal, the other head, and the Medical Humanities Research Institute, with the Executive Director, Melissa Baylor. I'm also really grateful to my colleagues around the university for their enthusiasm and support. It's really moving to be able to think about Rice not in terms of disciplines, and instead in terms of conversations. And so I'm very grateful for people showing up, people's enthusiasm, and for many of you who are presiding over the next couple days. At Rice, I'm also most deeply grateful to the graduate students who have made this possible over the last few weeks. Amanda Nedham has done the design, Colby Selman, Zach Schwartz, Tyler Odell, Sabaria Hussein, John Allison, Lin Yan Zhang, Camden Roy, Michaela Busman, and Ubang Abasi Akpan. Thank you too to the Department of Religion Administrators, Adriana Campos, Kira Monti, Cindy Pereira, Diana Hurd, as well as Marilyn Sanders for all of the travel, and Carly Cortez at the Zaza. The stewards of I swear it's done soon. The stewards of the Moody Center, Allison Weaver, Jason Evans, and Robert Blumrick, along with Mark in the back, have been gracious hosts. Michelle White, senior curator at the Menil Collection, has graciously extended her own hospitality. And Rashawn Mitchell and Silas Reiner's talents will bring us together at the Terrell Sky Space this evening for a dance performance right before the famous light show. We also thank all the custodial staff and caterers for their sustaining work. This is indeed not a Rice event, but a Houston event. And we're really grateful for you all over the last 5 years, for your patience, many of you, and your willingness to come to Rice and to make this not just a virtuality, but a reality. This is not just, in turn, a Houston event, but it's part of a World Congress. It's part of the World Congress called Foucault 40 Years After, which both celebrates and challenges the influence of Michel Foucault around the world. The steering committee of the Foucault World Congress has been amazing at unifying these discussions, and it's a chance for us to build robust international engagement, to see, to share, and learn from the ways that different cultural contexts have, over decades, received and reshaped the tools and the problematics of Foucault's writing and working life, which ended too early in 1984. There are over 70 events worldwide. You can see the map here. And this doesn't even cover it. I mean, we have things happening in South Africa, et cetera. And so you can see that every inhabited continent has some kind of Foucault event this year. And this is really telling, right? 40 years later, we have all this Foucault, and we have the ability now, through all this streaming, to actually create the conversations that have continuity over this year. It's really a pleasure then to be able to convene this kind of inaugural big one in the US by bringing some of our superstars from elsewhere, as well as in the US, UK, Italy, France, Turkey, etc. So thank you all. And thank you all for joining us over the next 2 days. We welcome questions from the audience. We do want this to be a discussion as much as possible. And people zooming in, you can do Q&A and we'll be mediating those questions. I do want to take a moment to say that, as we all know, there are many crises confronting countless people. There's a lot of suffering that is happening. There's a lot of forms of domination and destruction that are not just structural, but that are immediate. We're very privileged to be able to be in this space and to think about how the past informs our present and to collectively forge ways to think and act differently. Like Michel Foucault, there's no real separation between thought and action. We need to then think about how we can't devalue this critical work of thought. We can't, in the humanities and social sciences, cede our power to the other side of campus. We can't pretend like the cultural narrative of our own irrelevance is true. We can see, I mean, even in terms of one figure, Michel Foucault, how this worldwide kind of conversation is one that is not only vital for scholarly reasons, but also for addressing the kinds of political and contemporary crises that call us to this work and to which hopefully our work can speak in turn. So this conference is an invitation to better understand the histories of our own present so that we might best expose and challenge the forces of normalization and oppression that continue to operate around the world. Foucault himself was working towards a critique of his own present by forging genealogies of how practices, discourses, and norms shape present possibilities. In order to understand the import of that critique's potential and incompleteness, we need to understand how Foucault's influence has been taken up over the last 40 years. And this has been different in the US versus Brazil versus the reception in France, which Frédéric will talk about. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how this unfolds over this broader World Congress. In the US context, Foucault is alternately maligned as the dethroned woke philosopher king, or on the other hand, in the words of David Halprin, is anointed Saint Foucault, patron saint of gay liberation. The surging of French theory in academic circles in the 1990s left us with a very particular kind of Foucault and a distaste for French theory. This is very tiresome to me personally, and probably some of you. But also, this is something really important because it shows us that this is not just an academic influence, but a deeply cultural one that Foucault has. Time magazine in 1981 anoints Foucault the philosopher of power when Foucault is on his US circuit. In 1983, Vanity Fair says that Foucault tells us how we behave. So we have this philosopher of power image, but power isn't the end of the story. And so I'll briefly move us through first different stages of scholarship on Foucault, and then research by Foucault in the archives at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. I do this to set up the broader historical and archival frameworks within which we might situate and bridge our many academic disciplines, and also to give some context that is very basic for everybody. And so forgive me, experts, but also I want people to have a kind of archive of what it is that we're working with and what the framework is that we can consider. So if we just think about how capacious Foucault's work is, how many disciplines this relates to, we have some of my favorite texts up here, including Philippe Chevalier's Foucault et le Christianisme, which just got republished this week with l'ENS and has been expanded to incorporate his own research in the Les Œuvres de la Chair and Confessions of the Flesh materials. So we have so many different ways of coming to our guy, Michel Foucault. Foucault's studies has been deeply important. Materiali Foucauldiani, which Orazio Herrera has created. Claire O'Farrell has done amazing things with Foucault News and Stuart Eldon with Progressive Geographies. There are just so many sources that have been so exciting and have been giving us this material over time. And so as we think then about his influence, we can also come to think about the way that there are different stages of scholarship that are set up in relation to which texts of Foucault are accessible at any given time. In 2013, Daniele Lorenzini, who couldn't join us today because he's in Japan, but Daniele Lorenzini, Arianna Swarzini, who we're very lucky to have, and Ariane Revel were able to think about three different stages in this work that I find deeply important. So the first stage is the publication of the monographs, volumes 2 and 3 in the history of sexuality. These were published in 1984, right before Foucault's death. Now, this is strange because remember Foucault, philosopher of power, he had published his first volume in the history of sexuality, an introduction, as it's called in English, in 1976. So there's this 8-year period where people are waiting for the philosopher of power to come back and give a searing critique. Instead, he comes back with 2 books on ancient sexual ethics, one in ancient Greece, the other in Rome. So it's rather mystifying. People are trying to figure out what happened to the Foucault that is the most cited. Discipline and Punish, Foucault. History of Sexuality, Foucault. And so we end up instead with these materials that stir up some confusion, but give us some primary materials up front. The next stage, according to Lorenzini and Sforzini and Revel, we have this amazing collection. I mean, it's such a comprehensive collection published in 1994, the Écrits, which opens the scholarship up beyond the history of sexuality. And we see here Foucault's articles, interviews, publications collected for the very first time. It also enables us to think about the more complex ways in which his work as an activist connect with his work as a scholar. And as Francois Ewald has said, this collection introduces us to the many Foucaults: American Foucault, Brazilian Foucault, French Foucault, Japanese Foucault. It's like the Barbies, it's different Foucaults. Sorry. Respect Foucault. The third stage then is the publication of Foucault's complete lectures at the Collège de France. So Foucault, between 1970 and 1984, gives lectures at the Collège de France, which are completely public, with the exception of a year of sabbatical in 1977. These are invaluable materials, especially noting that Michel Sénélat says that after Foucault comes back from sabbatical, Foucault between 1978 and 1984 is really giving work in progress. So you can see how Foucault is thinking through different texts, different concepts, and he's moving between modernity and antiquity in these ways that seem baffling. He's moving between questions of power and knowledge, and then parrhesia and ethics and critique. And so this unfolding of how Foucault himself is thinking through his work and presenting it to a public audience is on full display. These works were published between 1997 and 2015 in French. And then Arnold Davidson was the English language editor, and these are now published in full. So all the material is there. I suggest that we add 2 more stages to these 3. The first is the publication of Elisabeth Léger, Confessions of the Flesh in 2018, supposedly the key. Not actually the key, although as Frédéric Gros, right, Ariane, I mean, Philippe, everyone has been working through this material in the archives in order to think about what status does it have in Foucault's oeuvre. Foucault himself was editing parts 1 and 2 of this book in the last couple of months of his life. He's doing this in a time he's deeply ill. And he continues this work. He continues this work, volume 4, anticipating its publication later that year in 1984. This is a complete book. There is no, this should not have been published. This is not a complete text. Foucault himself was planning on doing it, and the depth of changes that he's making to his typescript, especially in part 1, really illuminates something about how he wants to complete his own history of sexuality. So we have this not so much key, but question mark. This is the material that actually opened up my own inquiry in the archives in 2019, because as a long student of Foucault and modern philosophy, as well as late ancient Christian ascetics, bizarrely, it was John Cashin and Foucault that I came to together 20 years ago. And so I was delighted to see Foucault in 2005 in the Hermeneutics of the Subject English translation, where he talks about the centrality of Cashin. No one talks about Cashin. And so I was wondering, why was he on the hunt in late antiquity? And then why was he resonating with similar kinds of ethical questions of daily formation, similar ways of thinking about the body, the emotions, interrelationality? And so in this kind of joint set of questions about not only how do we live day to day, but also how do we think about our own experience as something that can both challenge forms of norms and open up new ways of relating to ourselves and others. In 2015, also, you should note the Pléiade edition. These are like my Bibles, my Foucault Bibles. It has not only the most rigorous and comprehensive editions of the monographs, all the monographs of Foucault, but the scholarly apparatus, which is done by these guys and others, is stunning. And they also benefit from this final stage of Foucault scholarship, which is the archival Foucault. Foucault's archives have been not only in the Bibliothèque Nationale, as we've been talking about, but the Centre Michel Foucault, whose president, Philippe Sabot, and past president, Rodrigo, have been the stewards of. And the archives now at the IMEC in Caen are deeply important. These are materials that Foucault himself gifted to the Bibliothèque de Chassois out of gratitude for letting him basically go and be a monk and do his research day to day between 1979 and 1984. These are materials that are deeply moving, and it's a very interesting way to think about context. How does a context in which we do our research shape how we think? So we have many archival Foucaults. We have especially the Foucault that I'm particularly invested in, the ethical Foucault, the late Foucault. But I'll give a very brief tour of the 6 collections at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and then we'll try to wrap things up. So we have the archives at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and these are just stunning collections. I mean, we have some of the experts, people who have been working in these archives since they were given. And I also want to just note gratitude for Henri Paul Foucault, who not only granted me and everyone permission, he's the person that you go through, for his permission, but for his ongoing wisdom. He's been just an extraordinary interlocutor and a deep expert in the archives, sitting there very patiently transcribing and creating these critical editions with his co-editors, basically all these people here. And these are the publications that are coming out from the archives that are going to contribute to this 5th stage of how Foucault scholarship itself will change. Laurence Lebras, the head archivist there, is extraordinary, and I'm so grateful to her, the whole team in the manuscript room, who have been very patient with this very obsessive American. Obsessionnel, comme ils aiment dire. Oui, c'est vrai. So the quick tour, you can find this online, and this is for people who are looking in virtually more than anything. The first is the collection 28284. This has been available at the BNF since 1994. It has the different versions in 1983 of volumes 2 and 3 in the history of sexuality. Also archaeology of knowledge, but I haven't looked at that. The next big one, this is the main one, 28730. This is the one that has over 37,000 pages of notes. These are Foucault's reading notes. These are Foucault's outlines. These are his draft chapters. This is where you see all of the daily rigor of research Foucault. He's really in there. He's doing the work. He's taking up sources. He's thinking critically, and he's submitting to this practice as a scholar. In 2015, Henri Paul Foucault gave to the BNF the collection 28803, which is a collection of Foucault's student notes from the 1940s and 50s. There are 15 boxes, I believe, and you can see the little folders, the little cahiers, whatever, notebooks, where Foucault is still referring to himself as Paul Michel Foucault. And there are little diagrams of works on genetics and neuroscience and psychology and different experiments. And so you can see Foucault was really training as someone in the material sciences, someone thinking about science in a very rigorous way, which is interesting because we don't associate him with that side of campus, so to speak. In 2015, Daniel Defer, Foucault's partner, also gave the collection 28804, which is a collection of correspondences. It's alphabetical. You can see many of the people online. There are letters from Foucault's mother, which are very sweet, but also Althusser and Barthes and Badinter, Boulay, Deleuze, Derrida, Dumézil, etc. The next gift was given by Daniel Defer, again, in 2020. There are two really lovely photo albums. I don't know if you've seen them, but the photo albums are very charming. You have Foucault in Kyushu in Japan with Defer. You have Foucault in Death Valley with Simeon Wade in the little bio farms. Henri Paul was in the reading room in the same day. And so we were looking through them and he said, oh, this is Foucault, Michel's first communion. So there's a little photo of Michel at his first communion, looking particularly pious or pissed, I can't tell. And so there's really just this other side of Foucault that comes to life. We also have in this collection all the university correspondences, the many, many invitations that Foucault himself received to give talks. You see dates, times, themes, honoraria. It gives us a slice of the intellectual culture, as well as the different ways in which Foucault was just sought after, especially in the United States, but around the world. And the sixth collection was given in 2022 by Daniel Defer, the partner of Michel Foucault, who passed away last year in February 2023. I know that he was very close to many of our guests, and so I want to take a moment to just honor him. The last collection Defer gave a bit before his death at the prompting of Laurence Lebrun, the archivist. And so when I went back in December of 2023, Laurence asked me if I wanted to see the untreated materials, of course, because I've gone through all the others, not comprehensively by any means, but she knows that I'm obsessive. And so she asked if I wanted to see the untreated materials, and of course. And so I had no idea what would actually happen, but we go to the manuscript room and she takes out these 4 envelopes that had never been opened. And these are the gifts from Defer. And so we carefully opened up each one of these letters, archived it, made a little inventory. And I won't say much, but these are some of the most intimate correspondences. And these are very intimate correspondences that to me really show the kind of depth of love that people have for Foucault. They show how people not only love him, but feel seen by him. There's something, the sincerity of these letters between 1950 and 1984 that are really moving, and I think confirm some of the ways that I think about Foucault as an ethicist. Foucault is someone full of care, someone who is engaged in the kind of daily living of trying and working hard. And that's because there are stakes for Foucault. There are real stakes for him as a philosopher, as an activist, as someone who's engaging in giving policy decisions, as someone who's invested in finding gay life in California, as someone invested in changing himself, being an intimate community, maybe changing the world, although I don't think he'd think of something that grand, but he did. He did change the world. And there is some sense in which we're all gathering here because we know that we want to be a part of a world, not as it is now, but a world that we can hope to build together, or at least forestall something worse. So this is my short pitch. This is the massive archive 28730, which is not arranged chronologically or conceptually. And so it's very obscure. This is one of my Unabomber maps. There are mistakes in here clearly, but this is something that needs to be done collectively. And so this is my first attempt at re-describing what the actual boxes are chronologically as well as a bit conceptually. And you can see how much of the work is really centered in the 1980s, 1970s, especially in the History of Sexuality series. All of that, and most of that, depending on your perspective. And then there's also this other secret book that Foucault was writing. Quand le gouvernement te soit des autres. And I'll leave us with this little timeline because this is the timeline that maps out the last decade of Foucault's research for the History of Sexuality series. It's something that is kind of at the heart of this little book that I have drafted, should be finishing this year. And it's taking us through the archives because it takes us from the power of Foucault up top, where he starts History of Sexuality in 6 volumes. It moves to Foucault's obsession with Christianity, first in the early modern confessors, and then turning back to antiquity. And then third, his deep engagement with ancient ethics in Greek and Roman sources. And so these are the movements of Foucault's thought as I come to see them, as well as the way in which Foucault's own research can be better seen and elaborated and therefore used. We can sharpen his own critical conceptions and his own contributions by doing this archival work. Get the story right, figure out how he himself is coming to these concepts, and then sharpen how we use them today. So to conclude, this is the power Foucault, this is the knowledge Foucault, this is the ethics Foucault. These are the three axes that can't be extricated if we're to think not only about how we're shaped, but also how we can shape ourselves, how we can be in relation, how we can create collectives, and how we can do this with care. So with that, I thank you all so much for being here. I thank everyone for being here virtually. Thank you for the presider, and I wish you all a good conference.